I guess, Dr. McIntyre, what I'd like to tell you is kind of how I came about to find you through my Google search and what it was that was going through my mind. And you can tell me if it even has anything to do with what you're studying or what you've been a part of. And if not, that's fine. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting conversation regardless on learning and sport and performance. But basically, it was kind of two things. I was thinking about improvement and the process, in the time of improving, not on the court with myself and adults. And specifically, I was thinking about when I was a kid. I remember I would go play a big match or I would go have a nice practice and I would think about it throughout the day. No one told me to do this. I wasn't conscious of doing this, but I remember processing what happened in the match, what happened at the practice, even down to specific things like how I was swinging at the ball. And I feel like that process of assimilating the information or being a part of it aided my improvement. And I relate it to like, the reason it made me think about it was like, I have some incidences where parents kind of throw their kids into tennis. The kid does not want to be in tennis. He's just there because he's there. And then he leaves the practice and I know he's not thinking about practice after he leaves the court. And I was just saying that maybe those kids aren't going to improve as fast if they're not thinking about the process of what the practice happened at the practice after they leave. Does that have anything to do at all with metacognition in sports?
Very much so. It's, metacognition is in this case, is your awareness that you have these, you have this psychological resource, right? And you're able to, use that resource in different ways. So, that you've got, we could just say headspace, right? After a match or after training or after coaching. And you can, that sometimes you probably have an experience of monitoring your thinking if you're really busy after that period. And you find that by monitoring your thoughts in that period, you realize that it's devaluing in both an emotional and a performance way your prior training on court. So if you suddenly, I put it this way, if you suddenly had to do maths exam and like math is not my strength, I would, if I had to do that after a bout of a sport, it would take away some of the positive mood. It would take away some of the confidence I built in my skills. And we know from research, it would cognitively interfere with the laying down of those memories, right? So what we call memory consolidation. And you probably have experiences whereby you've been particularly busy, especially if it's a cognitive task and it's not driving, you could still, reflect on it, but walking about, maybe holding a racket in your hand, there are some very good facilitative or enabling activities you can do, but you probably have an experience whereby you suddenly had to do a whole pile of other things and you felt like it's almost the I've been mugged experience, oh my, what happened there? I thought I played great tennis this morning and it's now no longer accessible to me in the same way. And that kind of prompts, that monitoring of your thought process prompts you to go, okay, what if after, my bout of tennis, I'm going to ensure I have some free headspace and I'm going to sit around and I might even stay close to the court, or I might pick up my racket, or I might on my walk, if I go for a short walk, I'll try process some of those thoughts. And what that does is that means that you then suddenly realize you have a strategy around this. And then it also, you probably have some knowledge around the principles of memory. So we say this is a complex and tiered process. So you have some knowledge that, memories take time to embed and you can get interference from other tasks. You have the capacity to monitor your thoughts, what we call metacognitive monitoring. And then you've got control, which is when you're monitoring it, your thought process, and you're realizing, I'm actually too busy trying to do something else. I'm just gonna you might sit down, you might walk through, do what we call a walkthrough for some different moves. And some of what that's metacognitive control, but some of what you're talking about is actually more specific. So it's down to what we call meta imagery. So use of visualization or imagery processes post-game to enhance the consolidation of memory. And I'll give you the kind of contrasting example. So there's two really good approaches post-training. One is to consolidate it through the activation of, visualization. Slightly more than that, we use the term imagery to focus on the multi-sensory integration. So it's the sound of the ball, the feeling of the strike, even that furry feeling on the tennis ball. So that's one piece of it. Another alternative way, and that processing, and that's really what metacognition is about. You understand how you learn, and you change, you employ certain strategies to facilitate the learning that suits you. Because there's all individual differences, but your strength might be around that visualization element. Turns out, for many people, actually sleep or a nap post-training is really good, because it allows you to do this at an unconscious level. I'd be sitting on the fence on this and going, look, memory consolidation is really good. Sleep is a good part of that. However, the kind of more conscious learning is really, really good, because what you're doing is you're giving your mind an opportunity to embed these memories and make them stronger and richer. Like what we say about, if you take a practice swing in many sports, including tennis, just say, like, it could be a topspin forehand, maybe even something more complex, like an inside out forehand, right? And you know what that feeling is when I say those words, right? That activates a memory in you. Yeah. And by you knowing that visualization works, that knowledge influences how you monitor your behavior. I love this idea that you could be walking back from training and you almost can't stop this flow of thoughts. And that's really good. That's like those memories, and they are memories at that stage, they spring like a fish from water. They like jump out at you. And that's really good, because that's how strong those memories are right there and then. By reflecting on them it doesn't have to be that structured way, but by allowing them to flow, by reflecting on them and thinking about some of the good parts of your game, anything you might want to change, by trying to reduce a kind of verbal narrative during that. So it's, you're not, using maybe language of expletives or anything negative to attach to it. And you could add in some, anchor words, which are more positive, but that also adds another layer of complexity. But this is a really common occurrence amongst, top class coaches, amongst elite performers. I remember reading years ago, one of, I know that you've got within NFL, another sport, you've got specialist kickers, and in rugby, which is, largely a European game with some footprint in the United States. In rugby, the kickers, when they're walking down the street, they as they step, they can feel like what type of kick that was, or they can't walk, more than 30 meters down the street after a match without visualizing a kick, because it's the current narrative, right? So what I'd say about this is this entirely is metacognition. A lot of this is dependent upon prior knowledge. The other bit is it's dependent upon expertise. So the fact that that visualization works, it improves performance. Well, that allows you to use post-performance visualization to help embed and consolidate those memories. That's super important, because memories, dissipate over time. There's, even with procedural or what we call skill memories, not like, what's the capital of Arkansas? Don't ask me, sorry. So even with skill memories and like verbal memories, you still have a degree of decay. What you're doing by consolidating or, reflecting on those memories and monitoring your thought processes afterwards, what you're doing actually is making those memories stronger, right? Now, skill memories dissipate a lot slower or decays more slowly than memory for a phone number or for capital cities, right? So declarative memory is different. It can decay quite quickly. Part of the reason for that, and this gets where it gets interesting, is that sport memories are multi-sensory. So when you hit the sweet spot of a ball, you feel it in your arm, you feel it in your tendon, you feel it in your whole body, you hear the sound of it, you feel it like through your fingers in the racket, in your grip. There's so much kinesthetic feedback from a sweet spot that, what actually happens is you often see a player will, you'll hit the ball really well, sweet spot, inside out forehand. Your opponent's left stationary, literally parked like concrete to the court. Yeah. And you'll hold your racket in the kind of end position. Yeah. And you'll be there for like where you could count to 3. You'll maintain in that position. So that's actually part of metacognition, is knowing that metacognitive knowledge is that it's actually good to hang on to positive feedback. And I have to flip to another sport to give an example to illustrate that. But if you play golf and you hit a really good shot, the players, they will hang on to the club, like caressing it, the grip on the club over their shoulder at the end of it, and they'll be there for 3 or 4 seconds, right? And you'll see this on TV, and you'll know this feeling yourself. If they hit a shank, what'll they do with the club?
They kind of like throw it, or
you got it. They drop it out of their hands. It's gone, right? Because they have knowledge which tells them the type of kinesthetic motoric feedback they're getting through the club is not going to improve their next performance. It's the wrong type of feedback. So that's based on, they have knowledge around that. Just like, one of the basics of racket sports and of golf as well is the further the backswing, the higher the velocity you can reach, right? So if you want to hit the ball really far, it's not about like pushing it through, it's about, backswing, right? And even that principle, it's actually technically called the Isochrony Principle, tells, and you implicitly know this, but some people, and by knowing that this works means that you play better tennis, you know what to do to hit the ball faster, you know that you need more time, you might have to change your position on the court. So this knowledge gives you advanced information to operationalize your skills in advance. So metacognitive skills come after playing, in terms of what do I do in my head to embed down the memories, and why am I doing that? Well, that's a great question, because it's a very naturalistic metacognitive process. Like you don't have to tell a kid how to visualize, maybe hitting a baseball, because it's America's, it's part of being an American kid that, that's something you will visualize. So visualization and imagery, these are very natural processes. The metacognitive monitoring that we're talking about here, that's the same type of process, right? Which is really interestingly linked to resilience. So the capacity to monitor your thoughts is linked to emotional control and resilience, and not just, that was a great serve, I'm going to hang on to the stroke, that I can now use visualization, or, here's an anchor word I'm going to use for that, the way I hit the ball on my, inside out forehand and left my opponent standing there. What happens is we're constantly monitoring not just our skill production, how much mental effort is going into it, but also our emotions. So there's a side of this, I'm sure, when you're engaged and thinking about, your play afterwards in your head, that it's not like, it doesn't look like you've just been watching Ozarks or something. You probably got a big smile on your face, and the same emotional content is going to come back. So part of our managing our skill production is associating that with positive emotions. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing, is ask somebody about, the 2 most positive, moments emotionally in their match, And, hopefully they're not all like, when my opponent broke the racket or, hit the ball into their net. Hopefully they're more about, I produced the skill and I had that sweet spot. I had that joy of hitting the sweet spot, which is something like, I've seen, 80-year-olds hit a tennis ball and get the sweet spot, and you think that they're 12, judging by the smile on their face, right?
Yeah. No, I think man, so many different things come to mind, after that discussion. But most recently, yeah, the players that perform the best are the ones that really just appreciate ball striking. They don't overcomplicate everything. They just love the feel of a well hit ball, and that's how I can tell when a kid's going to get good, because I don't have to entertain them with fancy drills and everything and stuff like that. They'll just go out and they'll just love to hit a ball back and forth and hit it better and better and better each time, and trying to just strike that ball a little better. And they just love the feeling that when that ball comes off the racket, right. And that's what they're trying to work towards, So that's very interesting.
There's a really good point on the ball strike. So that's, they're trying to master their skill, right? And their mastery is focused not on dominating somebody, which is it's good fun, right? I in the NFL, I support the Patriots, and now they're not known as the most sporting team in the world. So, I take that on board. So the Patriots like to dominate and really, really mess with their opponents, right? But there is, obviously that's not what they're all about, but somebody else might like the Saints or a team that probably play a more positive game, right? And what I'm alluding to is, like, one of the strongest motives in sport is mastery, because mastery is done almost irrespective of what your opponents do. So you're taking a whole pile of distraction stuff out of the game. This mastery focus around the sweet spot is really interesting, because there's a huge amount of kinesthetic feedback you get. And this, like, you can feel it when you hold the racket, like the racket is still vibrating for a little while after the shot. And that's an amazing amount of sensory feedback. And the reason it's so important is because what happens is we make a prediction, in our motor system about what the shot should look and feel like. And then if there's a direct correspondence between the mapping out and the implementation, in other words, what we predict comes through, that's like, it's really funny that synergy is what makes it happen, right? So what's really interesting about that synergy is, there's another way to look at this. So when I put a coffee cup in my hand, if this is full or empty, if this coffee cup is full, what will happen is, and you tell me it's empty, that's what'll happen, right? My hand will drop, because I will have recruited a certain amount of we call motor units in my arm, and had a corresponding amount of isometric force to hold an empty cup, and instead it's a heavy cup. So we have this conflict. So
what happens to me when I'm drinking and I forget that I've drank or I forget that I forget that I refilled my drink and it's now full and it was empty, and I go, and I spill it. I like come with too much force,
You're spot on. So actually we call this the beer can effect, right? Because you go to a party, you pick up your can and you go, whoa, somebody's drunk from your can, right?
Right.
So there's a conflict, both emotional and physical, for us when there's a lack of congruence between our planned motor action and its implementation. And there's on the other side, there's a joyful synergy when they match, right? And it's a really interesting point, because that's why some of this is dependent upon expertise. So essentially, experts have this really honed ability to switch their attention, right? They can think about X, Y, or Z. They don't just have to think about X. And we often find that, sub-elite players in lots of different sports, they become more singularly focused and more rigid, right? So the other aspect around metacognition in tennis is around a routine. So there's videos and you can watch different players, and Jan and Avant and different people have, I'll bounce the ball 8 times, 6 times. No, the top players bounce it till they feel the right rhythm.
Yeah.
So it's not a rigid set of rules. It's a flexible set of procedures they do to get their head right. It's not necessarily 3 times that they have to do, wipe their brow. It could just be once, but until I don't have sweat dripping into my eyes, right? It's much more functional. So metacognition allows the top players to monitor their level of focus and attention, and this allows them to switch on and off their attention, and to hone it in particular appropriate, relevant or task relevant information. And that's why, I always say bad sports psychology is really bad, and good sports psychology is listening to coaches and athletes, right?
Sure.
Because it's done in context. So, decades ago, sports psychologists would say your, serve routine, you should bounce the ball 4 times, then you should, shrug your shoulders and relax, then you should look and visualize exactly where you're going. Well, the point is, if you look and visualize where you're putting the ball, your opponent knows too, right? So,
sure.
You often get players visualizing prior to getting to the line. They're working in their head, here's choice of 2 serves, depending on where my opponent is standing. So they'll have a lot more flexibility. So really what metacognition is your capacity to think about your own thinking and then change, do something different, adapt it. So it's about, essentially a degree of cognitive flexibility, so that there isn't one mindset which is successful. There is multiple at different moments or different times in the game, and even for the same outcome, you can have it hit the ball really well with 3 or 4 different emotional states, right? It's not a direct correspondence.
Well, I always say, when's in tennis, when's the right time to go for a winner? I'll always say, well, if you're in this situation, or if you're in this situation, or if you just feel like you're feeling it, sometimes I feel
spot on. Yeah.
I know myself, I might not be in the perfect position for winner, but I just have gotten the last 4 balls. I just feel such a groove, and I just know I can hit a winner off this ball, and I just go for it because I was feeling it. I don't know consciously why that is, but sometimes you just feel good and you want to go for a winner,
That's a lovely way, because what you're doing is you're monitoring your prior behavior and you're using that to predict future behavior. And that's pretty much what psychology is, right? We work on the premise that the best way to predict future behavior is past behavior, or in that sport micro moment, it's actually your previous serve or your previous rally. Like if you were hitting the ball really sweet, and after your first serve, as long as you get your serve in, you're on top of that player and you're able to strike really well. Well, that's knowledge which is really important for you. But if you did monitor it and you followed a kind of more rule-based approach, you'd miss the subtlety, miss the chance, not just to win the game or achieve an outcome, but also to enjoy it.
Yeah.
You probably know, it's a description about Federer. Federer's look, the longevity alone is amazing, but the range and of shots is extraordinary, and the subtlety is amazing. But there's an aesthetic quality, to tennis. It's just a beautiful sport to watch, the synergy between 2 people, and between a person and the ball, and the racket merely being an extension of their hand. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
And that beauty is means we get transfixed when we watch it. And part of that, and this will be much more for you than somebody like me who's a kayaker, and I could understand a paddle being part of me, but not quite a racket. And when you watch tennis, you actually feel more fatigued than somebody that doesn't watch tennis. And part of that is, in your head, you are actually playing out all the possible outcomes. Every time a ball goes to point X or point Y, you're going, okay, I can read, because you're reading it. And that's why we say, actually, I've worked in professional sport, and it was in rugby, and we told the players, just before kickoff in the previous 90 minutes, don't be watching the match on the TV in the hotel of your, two of your league opponents playing, because that's actually quite fatiguing. And they got it. So there's benefits at a training scenario to watch and model other people's behavior. But in a competitive scenario, it's a lot better to save your energy, because what happens is we're activating the same brain areas and running a simulation ourselves. You're simulating, oh, I'd have done it like that. Well, that's mental work, right? So it's interesting is, that mental work can lead to a sense of fatigue, because for sure to visualize something isn't the same as physically doing it, but you'll often get what we call quasi movements. So you'll be, you have some hand movements or body movements which correspond with the real action. And then the second thing is cognitively it's demanding. So mentally it's demanding. And we also know if you wear a heart rate monitor while you're visualizing, your heart rate will go up, because it's blood flow to the to the brain area for visual cognition. So it'll probably go up by at least 5 beats or 10 beats per minute. And if you're imagining something very dynamic, as you activate those memories, your heart rate will go up even more.
Yeah.
So there's a physical side to thinking, which a lot of people have kind of ignored in the research area. There's a physical cost. I remember a friend of mine in the sport I did, which was kayak slalom, he said he was exhausted at the 1996 Olympics, and he was gold medal favorite. And what happened is he had visualized the course like 160 times, right? It's about a 2.5 minute duration whitewater sprint, and he had visualized it so many times. For sure, he knew it really well. Unfortunately, that's a high degree of mental fatigue, and that's like playing Tetris for like 3 hours, right? Which we recommend it for 3 minutes, but not for 3 hours. So in a way, it's good to know there, even with psychological strategies, we have to employ them in a way which is most beneficial.
Right.
So that means being able to switch off, being able to, like, we call down regulate. In other words, reduce the amount of like conscious thought we need. I'm not talking about mindfulness. I'm just saying that you actually need to have a switch off strategy at some stage as well.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Michelle, my wife has a very big board exam coming up, and she's getting some really good testing strategies, and she's a very hard worker. And I think it's surprising her that some of her colleagues are saying, okay, you need to take a day off of studying. You need to relax, and you need to just get away from it for a second. And I think sometimes she goes so hard on the studying that she doesn't do as good on her test as she thought, because she's just fatigued mentally, she just doesn't have anything left in her,
Yeah. And that's, so metacognition in the academic setting is actually taps exactly what you're talking about. There's a point, and this is a direct relationship with sport, but I'll give you the academic context to it first.
Sure.
So metacognition is best surmised within knowledge learning, like for an exam, in knowing when you've learned enough, knowing when you've done enough study, right?
Yeah.
You go, okay, I've done enough now, I can go to sleep. Otherwise, we're going to keep going until like through the night, caffeine supported or whatever. And that's harsh, because those memories decay very quickly. So metacognitive monitoring is going, I think I know enough. I've tested myself a number of times now. I'm happy enough that in a relaxed frame of mind, if I get some sleep, I'll be better able to answer that. And I now have done enough. So now I can chill out and go to sleep, or watch a movie and go to sleep and de-stress about the exam, rather than have the burden of stress now come up. So this is, in a sport context, is really interesting, because you will know, and with your experience, you may have been one of those kids who stayed on the court a long time, right?
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, right? Because that tells you you're chasing mastery, you're chasing, skill refinements, not just about acquisition, but refinement of the skill. And by doing that, you're also giving yourself like a really good chance for reflection, because court time is good. You're not hitting the ball every second you're on court. You're in the setting, you're in the context, you're able to give yourself time to reflect on each rally or each shot. And the other thing is, you also, there comes a point when, if it's enough, now is the right time to go home, or now is the right time to leave. I'm happy with where I'm at in terms of learning. And it doesn't mean you've achieved like 100% accuracy on a task.
Yeah.
It doesn't even mean you've achieved the last 3. It's much more holistic than that. And I'll give you an example. I've worked with some athletes who, who've been world leading in track. And one of the things they've talked about is, in hurdles, for example, knowing that they've done enough training, because, another hurdle session, it's a tough athletic event with a high risk of injury. If you get your timing wrong in hurdles, you can get hurt and you lose confidence very quickly, right? It's same with something like I've worked with in gymnastics and gymnastics vault. You don't want to over practice in gymnastics vault, right? Because you come in fatigued, you don't have the right velocity, you're going to get hurt. So there's a point at which athletes have to make a decision by monitoring their thought process and their confidence in the skill, which is really monitoring their emotional state. Is that, I've done enough. That it's a Goldilocks effect, just the right amount.
Sure. No, I think that was actually one of the other reasons I found you, was I was researching not just improvement on myself leaving as a kid, remembering juniors, but I've been doing these really successful adult beginner tennis initiatives where we're getting new people in the game and they're just falling in love with it. Yeah. And they will come out the first day and I show them this information, this is how you hit topspin. And they just like, oh, this is awesome. And they'll stay out there. And then they start to like not be able to get it, but they just keep going and they'll stay out there another 3 hours and they start to get a little frustrated. I'm like, look, I don't know why. I can't explain it. Maybe now I have an interview to show them, but I'm going to be like, go home, get some rest. Trust me. Yeah. You come back tomorrow. It's like they pick up, what I've noticed, they pick up right where they left off, but then they can accelerate again for some reason. It's not like they come back better or, but they come back and are able to kind of get right where they left off and then accelerate from there, their improvement. So
that's a lovely description, right, of how, certainly adult learners are different, right? And to recognize that, I think, is really important. And if it just give a couple of potential influencing factors. So one is, don't go from your tennis lesson into your board meeting, right? Because what you've just done is diminish the capacity for you to consolidate in a naturalistic way those memories. So we mentioned earlier sleep, but the type of rehearsal you talked about, which is very spontaneous imagery, a bit of quasi movements, allow it to happen, go for a walk. That's a good way. They should leave time to process the learning. And that might mean, that, as you say, you don't want them on court for 3 hours, you want them on court for 90 minutes or 2 hours, and then have time, or an hour, and then have time to process the learning, which isn't, necessarily sitting down and have a coffee straight afterwards. Or if it is, it's then have some headspace in which you're not like taking your work calls for the next hour, right? Because this has an interference effect.
No, I think
the interference, the kind of frustration piece is really interesting. And that's where, if you focus at their, sport is actually all about monitoring your emotions and being able to use your emotions as strengths. And we know that sports like golf, for example, that isn't always written on your golf clubs, right? No matter how much they cost. They don't say, please focus on your positive emotions, try regulate your frustration, and do not break these clubs, right? They don't say that. They probably should, right? So instead, what you can do is you can say, your job is not to take away your 5 best shots. Your job is to take away your 5 best moments. Because sometimes it's not just a shot. It could be an insight you shared with them. It could be watching somebody else. Some of them you want to be, grounded in their own experience. In other words, their own moments. And I'll give you an example of this is, the research evidence suggests that watching, a super high level expert has short-term influence upon performance, right? So it's in England, they call it the Wimbledon effect, right? So kids that play in tennis courts around London after Wimbledon for a couple of weeks play really good. And a lot of people describe playing with better rhythm and flow. For sure, they're watching, many hours of tennis a day, maybe actually not in court that much. So there are many issues. It could be taking rest because you're just watching it, but there's potentially kind of short-term learning effect. But what's interesting, it doesn't translate into long-term learning, right? So why is that? And it's partly because we go back to this idea of, each individual is different. The idea or model I have in my head for, a topspin forehand, which is also cross court, right, is different than what you might have. And if I watch you, you're going to be so many, grades higher than me that like it's almost worthless me watching you, right? So what actually is it's not worthless, but is diminished effect, right? And it could be sometimes detrimental because I go, God, I could never do that, right?
Right.
And instead, what you can do is you want people to focus on the best of their own experiences, because then what that does is that sets off this kind of, these fish is jumping out of water, they're walking along, they're imagining, the memories are coming back of their, their best serve, it's not always just their best physical moment or serve or fastest serve. It could be when they chased a ball down really hard to return it, right? Which just showed a bit more grit. And in a way, these psychological moments are really important because these are the strongest memories we have, or the ones which, we have these that are emotionally laden. And then they're able to access them in the future. And that's why I'm, part of being a psychologist is it's actually really good to have emotional diversity when you play sport. It's really good to have a range of emotions, because the positive ones get anchored to these really strong positive behaviors, I'm hoping. And the negative ones, you have to learn to cope with anyway, because that's sport, right?
Right.
So in a way, it's people have to kind of become a bit accepting of those. The metacognitive side of this is metacognition isn't just thinking about thinking. It's thinking about how we can think better and how we can use our emotions, because we emotions were, even having the headspace to be emotional about something requires, has a direct influence on their capacity to think about something. In a positive emotion, it often broadens our capacity. Even our field of vision gets a bit broader, and we're really stressed, we have a narrower field of vision, and that's part of what we know about the stress response. But knowing that when we're stressed, that happens. Knowing that when I won't just say relaxed, because often it's not just relaxation, as it's just about having more vitality and more positive emotions, smiling, and that joy. That's a really powerful motive for future behaviors, and embeds these memories which we can reach back to. So 3 days after a tennis lesson, somebody either spontaneously or in a planned way can reflect back, and maybe they're looking at their diary to write down some notes they have about their game, and that's a really good way to keep them involved, by the way, just in terms of motivation. Come on back, because you're now associating your tennis lesson with positive emotions. And that's why people go to Vegas, right? Potential for positive emotions, right? And other things, but you get the idea, so it's, they know that there'll be a win-win in terms of motion, skill development, and the other reasons they love the game by going back. So what you want people to do is go, have a good day at the office, just from, maybe today or tomorrow before I see you next time, just give yourself 5 minutes to think back about your 5 best moments. And that anchors these memories. They become stronger. These become, really good motivating memories for people in the future, to get them to go back and persist. Because we know persistence is, and grit are really important attributes. So that's just one way we can remind people of those emotional states, how they overcame some challenges, what it felt like hit the sweet spot. and use that as a mechanism to get them back.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, it almost seems like and I, because I know I definitely tell my students when they're on court, document what you did wrong in your head, take notes so you know what to work on at practice. But maybe I also have to remind them to document what you did right and try to call back those memories to reinforce it,
Yeah, and look, as a coach, and I worked briefly as a coach in canoe kayak, and we have access to a lot of information. When you see somebody's stance, you can tell whether they learned tennis in a single figure age range or in their teenage years. I'm pretty sure you can tell that. You go, yeah. Okay, so it's hard not to make a lot of inferences and judgments on the basis of that. And like, that's part of expertise that you have too. What's interesting is, how do you use that in their benefit? Well, you go, okay, their stance isn't great, but actually they got really good flexibility in their shoulders, so it turns out that they can get round for shots, right? How do you use that? Or they have some other sport experience that they've told you about, which you could leverage to get them play a little bit unconventional but better for them.
Sure.
And then by focusing on their strengths, not their weaknesses, what you're doing is you're also focusing on them as a model for their own behavior. So it's, you did this well 3 times here, right? And you don't need video, because people have memories that are like more powerful than video, because it can be richer, right, than the video experience, right? I'm not saying you can't do video, but we're getting somebody to recall something. And I'll give you one example. So if they hit a really good serve, just for one example, just to get them to take time out afterwards and reflect on what just happened. Like, bounce the ball, go through it, do the routine again, and then hold the ball, and then just visualize it. And that's a really potent way of anchoring that memory. So suddenly that memory isn't like the memory of the previous 5 serves. It's unique, distinctive. You've given time for them to reflect on it right there and then they can access it more readily in the future. And then their model for getting better isn't based around the type of, we know they've got limiting characteristics, or they've got some challenges, but it's based around their perception of their game, that they can do some good some things well. And then you're increasing their bandwidth, so as I say, like, stress is often, in the worst sense, can narrow people's field of vision, right? People don't even see that in a stressful scenario that their opponent in tennis is standing on almost on the center line, that there's room out wide, right? They just don't see that. And when you're watching, it's like, can they not see? Can they not see? Can they not see?
Right.
And that's because it's their stress response. But instead, if you're able to reinforce, not each, but some during a workout, of some of their positive behaviors, where you see it written on their face. It's the one thing it's nice to be on Zoom and not wearing a mask for a change, because what's really important is the role of emotions in mediating our behaviors, in shaping and reminding us of the good stuff. And that's what we can do. Through sport, we have this capacity to have these really positive emotional experiences. And if you go back to that mastery motive we talked about earlier, that feeling of hitting the sweet spot, if everybody turned up at tennis and the only thing you want to do is hit the sweet spot, God, it would be great, right? So people have lots of different motives, and you're trying to reconcile that. But by focusing maybe on the 3 positives and 1 negative, if you flip the ratio, like a one, what we call it when I work in professional sport, we normally say, working with a player going into a match, and even then it's a little bit too late for change, but athletes want to have work-ons. So you say, okay, you got 2 work-ons and 3 reliables, and they go, my reliables are and my work-ons are this and this. And for sure, even that is a lot of information for a pro player going into a game, but pros are encyclopedias of the game, right? And that's in a way what you're relying on. With a younger athlete or a novice athlete, you've got one where you mightn't even mention the work on. You've got 2 strengths where you're just two reliables, two things you do all the time, because like the amount of feedback, as you know, within pro sport is huge and mega detailed, and a novice can only take on board like a really small proportion of that. And that's part of, as they get better, they can handle more feedback. As they get better, they can probably handle more instructional directive feedback and even negative feedback. But early on, you're trying to instill confidence in you, in the game, in their belief in the efficacy of what you're doing, and also predominantly in their belief that they're on a mastery trajectory, that they're here to learn and they're getting better. Because it's we often find that coaches in a top level, their players outgrow the coach, right? So at the top level, a very high level, a superb athlete coming through will often progress through 2 or 3 coaches. And that's fine, because coaches offer different, strengths, but also the player, they'll have this encyclopedic knowledge of their game, which they're able to implement and translate all the time into action. And that's a different set of skills. So there's one other bit here is, one of the things we know about expertise is, and the reason in our 2013 paper we talked about expertise and metacognition and meta imagery, is that experts aren't just, in fact, they're maybe not even better at concentration, right? They're maybe not even better at visualization. They're maybe not even better at, some of the core psychological skills, but they're better at using them at the right time. And that it's about timing, emotional regulation, visualization. These are all learnable skills, and for sure they get good at them, but they're using their mental effort. Go back to the psychological resources question. They're using it at the right time. And that means they're able to, it's a classic question is, what does an expert think of? And some people would say an expert thinks of nothing because it just happens. And I go, no, they're monitoring. They're going like, this is where I'm at. This is how I feel. This is why, watching somebody like Nadal or Federer, like they play complex games, right? Because they don't just turn up and rock. They turn up and they see there's ebb and flow the whole time. Because they're always trying to see what's optimal, right? And optimal could be, I'm going to keep this person going. I'm going to make them run really hard. I'm going to play towards, their ankles hurt. I'm going to make them run more, right? So that idea that expertise is not about something just becoming automatic, because when some of the skill becomes automatic, it gives you better capacity to think about your own thinking, to reflect on, as you said earlier, no, I feel really good right now. I've hit a few good shots. Now I'm going for a winner. And that's based on that monitoring. If you were not thinking, you said, being in flow in a game means you don't think about anything, well, then you'd never have that thought process. So what we know now about expertise and shaping expertise is about people. You can be thinking about lots of different things at the right time, and you can monitor your performance. And as long as we call it like a switching strategy, it's actually quite good to be switching from different strategies. Like top players don't have to visualize every shot because you serve so often, right? It's not that important. But if you've got a big serve or you're trying to practice your serve, you might visualize in a lot of different scenarios. And that's whereby it's less rigid. We're more talking about psychological resources, are like you having access to a large swimming pool full of resources and using that appropriately. Not that you divide it into lanes, or it's that formal, but it's about the flexible use of your metacognitive metacognitive strategies and your thinking that allow you to do things other people can't do to some degree.
No, completely. And I think this is related. I definitely notice in tennis, the top players, because you talk about ebb and flow, the top players seem to be able to keep their positive momentum going longer and able to stop their negative momentum sooner than the other players. And even in the sense of like, they'll have a tendency to hit more consecutive good first serves where their opponent might hit 1 or 2 and then double fault. Their serve will almost keep getting better until they lose it, but they just have these longer runs of momentum, which I think is like they're using their self-reflection in a good way,
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's another bit about this, which is as a researcher in metacognition, we're still working on aspects of this. We just had a paper accepted today or yesterday for a scientific journal, and it's a little bit about movement during visualization. To what degree is it beneficial to allow these quasi movements, or the traditional approach is relax and sit in the chair. Well, in tennis you don't sit in the chair, right? And if you do, it's not the ideal place to be. So we think that you can use it more, imagery and visualization can be used more dynamically, and it takes a certain degree of awareness. And I like your point about they're able to monitor their thinking, and you're using the word self-reflection. Well, even though I'm a researcher in metacognition and mental imagery, I go like, it's really good to use the appropriate language, right? Today we can talk about metacognitive, we call knowledge, which is how our mind works and how we think our mind works. The monitoring is, where is my attention at right now? What are my attentional resources like? Do I have lots of, possibility to remain focused, or am I fading? And then you go, control is, can I switch strategy? So it turns out you can use the language of the client or athlete, right, and player, and not have to use those terms. And you're going to be essentially like a conductor who, you know a lot more than you're giving, right? So you have a backstory, but the front story, it's like a website. The front side of a website, it'll just be, just reflect on that. Just try see how it feels, right? Hold the racket in your hand. What's it like to do a practice swing? Okay, now do a practice swing just show me without doing a full movement, or just show me how you'd hit that, and close your eyes and try see you doing it. And you don't have to do it faster. You can allow this to be very naturalistic. And what that allows you to do is, adult learners don't feel intimidated because they're getting to explore it, and younger learners, what they're doing is they're not intimidated by the language and the complexity of it, right? Because they wouldn't be able to take on board that complexity, but they will over time. So what we found out is that expert players, just like expert athletes, are essentially the walking encyclopedias and know all these processes, and often just use different words. And that's really good, because metacognition is not the term that athletes necessarily need to know. Athletes need to know self-reflection, visualization, right? They need to know certain terms which are easy for them to get a grip on and use.
Right. Yeah, no, the whole metacognition is definitely the thinking about thinking, and then it can be a little daunting, but I think you've done a good job of definitely explaining what it is. And I appreciate your time. I think that's great stuff, Dr. Macintyre. I think there's a lot of applicable scenarios where I think you can get more rapid improvement out of people by being aware of those things happening. I think if you tell me anyone can do it, then I'll believe you. I feel like it's something that anyone can, even the people that you think of are as not being self-aware people. They kind of go through their life, and you just don't think of them as people that are going to be able to reflect upon themselves. I think if you find the right strategy to get them to self-reflect or to become aware of what just happened, even they can have access to the skill,
I love that. That's a very optimistic way to look at it. And that's kind of what sport is. Sport is a window into another world, because it's not for everybody is it their primary purpose, but it's a window into yourself. That's in a way what you're doing is they're getting feedback from the ball, from you, from their the score, from their opponent, and by them being immersed in that. And especially, like, as we know, the feedback we talked about earlier to bookend the conversation is, hitting that sweet spot. That is, I haven't hit a tennis ball in about 2 years. And I can still remember what it was like then.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, no, for sure. All right. Well, how about this? Can you give everyone just one good tip for improving their tennis game using metacognition? Obviously you've just given us many good tips, but if you could leave us with a good suggestion, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it would go back to what we talked about at the beginning is, give your space to process and reflect on what really good bits you did during your training or your game. And they don't have to be the winning shot. They don't have to be outcome related. They could just be feelings or moments where you hit the sweet spot and you had a really good connection. Because if you reflect on that, that's going to help the next time you're in court. And you're going to also have an opportunity between now and then to think back to it. And those memories, they will spring like a fish from water, and you get to have that joy all over again.
That's awesome, Dr. Macintyre.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll try to bring back some data and let you know what the response is to our interview. And thanks for everything you're doing for sports and thank you for doing the interview.
Pleasure, Jeff. Listen, have a great day, right? Take care.
All right, you too. Talk to you later.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.